back, and it's my distinct pleasure to say I'm joined by a dear friend of many years, not to be confused with an old friend, a woman I have come to admire tremendously for both her courage and her tenacity in covering some of the most challenging stories of our time, often from behind enemy lines in places like Moscow and in Hong Kong, even back in the day when it was still a little dodgy for a Wall Street Journal reporter and editorial writer. Claudia Rosett is her name. She is these days, I believe, the Foreign Policy Fellow of the Independent Women's Forum, and always a welcome guest here. Claudia, it's good to have you back with us at Securing America. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Frank. Great to be here.
So, Claudia, I want to draw on some of your cumulative experiences with bad actors. Let's start with Vladimir Putin. And there's a lot of speculation about what he's up to. From your time monitoring the Kremlin closely, what do you think are his ultimate objectives? Do they have much to do with NATO expansion or really Russia's expansion? And if you would, just maybe address yourself to what happens if, in fact, Finland and Sweden do join NATO.
This is all about Russia expansion, and it tracks back to when the Soviet Union fell. Right away, there was a contingent that thought that was a great tragedy. Putin himself, years later, said it was, I believe, he said the worst disaster, geopolitical disaster of the 20th century.
Greatest catastrophe, I think
Yeah,
was his exact word.
catastrophe.
Yeah.
Thank you. Exactly. And this proceeds from that view of the world, that the Soviet Union was a great power. Now, Putin didn't like communism. He disparages it. He understands the immense damage that it did to the Soviet economy, but he does want the expansion of the Soviet Union. And he has inherited a lot of the techniques that kept the Soviet regime in power. He's a KGB trained thug. He understands their manipulative techniques very well. He uses them all the time. He's ruthless. And NATO is in the way in the sense that if they stand up to him, it's a problem for him. But this is basically about resurrecting as a sort of mystical Mother Russia nouveau empire what was the Soviet Union, but without the communist problem that beggared the country and
Right.
its satellites.
Do we have a vital interest in the outcome of this conflict with Ukraine?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Look, this is right now the front line. We are looking more and more, this is becoming more and more dangerous, urgent, present, and violent. A showdown between tyranny and the free world. It's that basic. And right now, Ukraine is the front line. In 2019, when you saw the protests in Hong Kong as China began to throttle a free society there, that was the front line. Ukraine is now the front line. Very likely Taiwan is the next front line. These are various places where important things are being tested at the margin, vital things to the shape of the world order in this century. Right now,
Yeah.
that's Ukraine.
And Claudia, there are those who agree with you and me that China is the main thing, the Chinese Communist
Yeah.
Party, the threat that it represents. And I think we're all very much concerned that it is poised to attack Taiwan. Uh, to those who would argue that, well, we can't afford a two front war, we need to keep our eye on Taiwan and that main threat. Um, what do you say about what we're doing in Ukraine at the moment, and should we be doing more or something different? Do you think?
Yeah, we should be doing more. We should look. There are a couple of pieces to that. In Ukraine, the Biden administration effectively invited this invasion, gave
Mm-hmm.
Russia a green light with everything from President Biden's mention that he'd tolerate a minor incursion, which was a very bad thing to say,
Mm-hmm.
to slow walking the weapons, to sort of trying to tailor them to the immediate need. If they had sent in the heavy artillery they finally began to send, it's possible you wouldn't have seen that invasion in the first place if we'd done it last year as Putin
Right.
began massing troops. Instead, What you saw was President Biden held a summit in Geneva with Vladimir Putin, dignified him with that, and
Mhm.
came away with nothing, followed by the debacle in Afghanistan. So you have all of those problems. What could have been done differently? We could have actually deterred the invasion. We could even now be doing more to stop it. The ridiculous nonsense that went over the MiGs that Ukraine was asking for, where it became basically the Biden administration wanted to fob off responsibility for that on Poland if the Poles were willing to do it. The United States was what? Afraid
Right.
to send them? Um, then what else should we be doing?
Leading from
Okay,
behind, I think, is the term that has been
yeah.
described, applied to these sorts of issues. Claudia, well, let me just turn then fully to China. If we should be doing more in Ukraine, what should we be doing now to learn the lessons of Ukraine, which it seems, again, we agree vehemently, should involve providing them with the equipment they need to deter China now,
Oh,
not try to scramble and get it to them after the fact if it does take place.
yes, Frank, look, what we actually need to be doing is we need to be able to fight a two-front war. We have huge problems on two fronts. We have Russia,
Right.
which is actively invading Eastern Europe right now. We have
Mhm.
China, which is threatening to do so and is far more powerful and efficient. People keep saying, well, the problems of the Russian military must be giving real pause to Xi Jinping. I don't think that's how this works. You need to remember China looks down on the Russians. Xi Jinping doesn't look at Putin and see, they may talk about their no limits partnership, and they certainly have a partnership, especially in military affairs. But I don't think Xi Jinping looks and says, gee, that could be me. The Russians have vast
Right.
resources and territory and squander it relentlessly. They have this huge reserve oil
Mhm.
and gas. China is hungry for that. And they
Mhm.
have made out of manpower a much more successful economy for all its horrendous problems. Uh, and they look down on Russia. I think
Yeah.
that Xi Jinping is studying that to see what useful lessons he can take to improve his abilities. But I think the message he's taking is the US will be late, slow, contradict itself. It is led by a president who doesn't always seem to exactly know what he's doing
Mm.
and left with the question of who's in charge. Bottom line, Frank, we need to be able to fight a two-front war. And while that might be sound like la la land because the administration is not effectively preparing for that, that is what we're going to get if we are not
Yeah.
prepared to deter it.
Well, let me drill down on that point, Claudia, because I agree. I personally, I think we're in a global war.
Yeah,
It's the
that's
early
right.
stages of it, and frankly, it could expand vastly beyond these two fronts,
Yeah.
let alone uh, be a two front instead of a one front problem. But Claudia, the practice of the administration now on three different occasions that I can think of having the president answer directly a pointed question to him about whether the United States will defend Taiwan has been, yes, we are obliged to do that. And within sometimes minutes, the White House comes back and says, well, what the president meant to say is maybe, maybe not, maybe we're back to strategic ambiguity. Claudia, I'm not sure whether you're aware of this. I talked about it earlier with Gordon Chang. Uh, we have a very interesting and I think timely contribution made to this debate about Taiwan called Stopping a Taiwan Invasion by an
Okay.
expert panel led by our own Dr. Stephen Bryan. Um, it pretty much puts at the top of the list of the things we should be doing, abandoning strategic ambiguity in favor of strategic clarity.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on the importance of that, and what the Chinese are taking away from this toing and froing?
Yeah. Look, the vital element of deterrence is that you have to be credible. When you say you can't, don't do that, or you will be sorry, you have to be very believable. They and this toing and froing undermines that at every turn. Slopped on top of the Afghanistan route, which said the U.S. won't stand up for these things. Slopped on top of the repeated assertions by President Biden and his team that they did not want to engage U.S. troops to engage with the troops of a major military power. They were talking about Russia. But believe me, China heard that. And that's a message that's very disconcerting about Taiwan. Finally, let me go for a minute to diplomacy. On the UN front, we've seen interesting sort of footsie by China back and forth on where it stands on Ukraine and all the UN meetings that have actually done nothing. But China keeps talking about the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Well, what China, I'm sure, basically where that translates to for China is as soon as they say Taiwan belongs to us, they say we have full claim to that. Nobody else can interfere. That's the diplomatic groundwork being laid by what sounds like agreement with the US on Ukraine. And in that sense, it is vital to discriminate between Taiwan and the People's Republic of China. It is vital in more urgently than it ever was. So strategic ambiguity is not serving the purpose it did in, say, 1968. It's,
when we were powerful, and the Chinese, I think, had to take into account that disparity in capabilities. No more, unfortunately. Claudia, Rosett, we have to leave it at that for the moment, but we will return to you soon for updates on all of this and more. Your insights are tremendously important and appreciated. We'll talk to you soon. Next up, we will speak with Bill Walton about the financial aspects of all of this and more.
Real America's Voice presents War Room with Steve Bannon.
People have legitimate questions. They want to see data. They want to see evidence.
Don't miss War Room every weekday at 10 a.m. Eastern.